On July 4th, 1776. Most of the other delegates didn't sign it until August 2nd.
The country of the United States of America began as an idea back in 1776. On July 4th, 1776, a group of farmers, lawyers, and merchants signed a document blaming the most powerful empire on earth, the British Empire, for overreach. The Declaration of Independence was not really a list of complaints, though. It was a promise. The government would answer to the people, not the other way around. Every person would stand equal before the law. And what makes this moment so remarkable is that no large nation had ever been built on this idea before, rather than on a bloodline or a border. America was an experiment, and almost nobody expected it to last. Most observers in Europe quietly assumed it would fold within a generation, maybe two, but instead it became one of the longest running systems of self-government in human history. The idea held for a very long time. It kept holding. By 1913, the United States had become the workshop of the world. After a difficult internal test in the 1860s that nearly split the young nation in two, America turned its full energy toward building. Steel, railroads, oil, and electricity transformed the country in a single generation. That year, the United States produced 1/3 of the entire world's industrial output. It was more than Britain, France, and Germany combined, according to standard economic histories of the period. A nation that had lagged behind Europe just decades earlier now outbuilt all of its rivals at once. Yet the rewards were not shared evenly. There was a thin layer at the top who collected most of the gains, while the workers powering the factories saw very little of it in comparison. Now that tension between extraordinary wealth and uneven reward is definitely worth remembering because it returns later on again and again and again in the history of America.
Pacific time in San Francisco when the announcement came, and people were quick to leave their offices for an
By 1945, America stood as the most powerful nation on the planet. Two global conflicts had shattered Europe and left the United States almost untouched and immensely strong. And that year, America accounted for roughly half of the entire world's economic output and held the majority of the planet's gold reserves. What followed was perhaps the closest thing to broad prosperity any society has ever produced. A single income could support a family, buy a home, and send children to college. New highways stitched the country together, and in 1969, Americans walked on the surface of the moon. Well, that's debatable, but we'll save that for another video. American music, films, and fashion spread to nearly every corner of the globe, and for about 3 decades, the promise of 1776 seemed not only alive, but within reach for everyday people. Now, this was the peak, but peaks, of course, by their nature, don't last forever.
This year, Ohio will celebrate the 250th anniversary of America's freedom with things like movies, picnics, and events throughout the year.
2026 and 2027 could be the year that the United States collapses. In 1976, a British scholar named Sir John Glubb noticed an unsettling pattern in the great powers of the past. Most dominant nations, he argued, lasted roughly 250 years, about 10 generations, and they pass through similar stages. They begin with bold pioneers, expand outward, grow rich through commerce, settle into comfort, and then slowly turn inward and lose their shared sense of purpose. The Dutch, Spanish, and British eras of dominance each ran close to that 250-year mark, and it's important to be honest here about this. This is a pattern, not a law though. But several empires lasted far longer, of course, but the rhythm is very striking, enough that serious analysts, they still study it today. And in 2026, America reaches exactly 250 years. That timing alone has a lot of people asking some very uncomfortable questions.
The United States has to roll over $9 trillion of debt next year.
The total national debt of the United States of America passed $39 trillion in March of 2026. This is a figure that was confirmed by Treasury data and the Joint Economic Committee. To put it into perspective, the debt is now larger than the entire American economy, sitting at roughly 123% of yearly output. At the same time, wealth has gathered at the very top in a way not seen in modern records. Federal Reserve data shows the richest 1% of Americans now hold about 31% of the nation's wealth, which is a record high, while the bottom half of all households hold around 2.5% of the nation's wealth. The same imbalance defined the factory era a century ago. The difference, though, is that this time the gap is far bigger.
American trust in government is declining.
One of the most telling signs of the collapse of the United States of America is not a financial one at all, but it is the lack of trust. When we look back to 1964, 77% of Americans said that they trusted the federal government to do what's right most of the time. And fast forward to September of 2025, that number had fallen to just 17%. And this is according to the Pew Research Center. This is one of the steepest collapses of public confidence ever recorded in a stable nation. Some scholars argue that this points to much deeper trouble, while others note that trust has dipped before and it has recovered before. But what we know is that when people stop believing that their institutions are working for them, well, that original promise of 1776 begins to feel very, very distant, because the American Constitution was based on the government working for the people and answering to the people. That big erosion of faith in the government structure, it alone is enough to worry those who study how great powers fade over time. The
protests taking to the street.
History will look back on the deep political divisions in our country.
United States of America has stood at the brink of collapse several times before, and each time it reinvented itself. It survived the near split of the 1860s. It was rebuilt after the Great Depression during the 1930s. It steadied itself after the scandals of the 1970s. And unlike empires of the past, the United States still leads the world in advanced technology, scientific research, and innovation. And its money remains the currency that the world trusts most. History suggests that nations do not fade because of one hard decade. They fade only when their people stop believing the founding idea is worth the effort. In 1776, that idea was equality and self-government. In 2026, the real question is not whether America has stumbled, it's whether Americans still have the will to do what they have done several times before when the country was on the verge of collapse, as well as do they still have the willpower to uphold the image and the values that America was built upon.